I finished my late shift at the cozy cafe where I work. It was almost midnight. A cool breeze made me shiver as I stepped outside. The city was quiet, and I decided to take a shortcut through the park to get home faster. During the day, the park is full of families, joggers, and dog walkers. But now it was eerily silent. The only light came from a few street lights, casting long, spooky shadows on the ground. As I walked, I could hear the leaves rustling in the wind and the faint hum of traffic far away. The path through the park seemed much darker and scarier than I remembered. I hugged my jacket tighter around me and tried to stay calm. The park, which felt safe and friendly during the day, now seemed like a completely different place. As I walked deeper into the park, a feeling of unease started to creep over me. The shadows seemed to grow longer and darker, and the silence became almost deafening. I looked around and noticed a man sitting on a bench up ahead. His posture was stiff, and he seemed to be staring right at me. My heart skipped a beat. I told myself I was just being paranoid and kept walking, trying to shake off the feeling. I quickened my pace, hoping to get through the park as quickly as possible. But then I heard it. A soft, steady sound of footsteps behind me. My heart started pounding in my chest. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe just someone else taking a shortcut. But I couldn't ignore the fear rising inside me. I glanced over my shoulder and saw the man from the bench. He was following me. His face was mostly hidden by a hood, but I could see his eyes. They were dark and focused right on me. My stomach turned and my mind raced. Why was he following me? What did he want? I picked up my pace even more, almost jogging now. The footsteps behind me quickened too. Every time I looked back, the man seemed to be getting closer. Panic started to set in. The once familiar path now felt like a twisted maze, with every shadow hiding potential danger. The streetlights flickered, casting eerie patterns on the ground. I could hear my own breathing, fast and shallow, mixing with the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. The distant hum of traffic seemed to fade away, leaving me alone with my growing fear. I had to stay calm, had to think. I decided to take a side path that led to a playground. Maybe I could lose him there, hide among the equipment until he gave up. I turned down the path, my footsteps echoing loudly in the empty park. The playground came into view, a ghostly silhouette under the dim light. I ducked behind a slide, crouching low and trying to steady my breathing. I listened intently, hoping the man would just pass by. But then I heard the footsteps stop. Silence. My heart pounded in my ears as I waited, every second feeling like an eternity. Suddenly I saw a shadow move on the ground. The man was standing at the entrance of the playground, looking around. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't see me. Just as I thought he might leave, another figure emerged from the darkness, another man. They exchanged a few words too quiet for me to hear and started moving towards my hiding spot. My fear turned to terror. They were working together. I was trapped, with no one around to help me. I knew I had to act fast, or I wouldn't make it out of the park that night. Desperation took over. I couldn't stay hidden any longer. I bolted from my spot behind the slide and sprinted toward the central fountain. The open space might make them think twice about following me. My legs burned as I ran, and my breath came in quick, ragged gasps. Fumbling with my phone, I tried to dial for help, but my hands were shaking too much. I couldn't get the numbers right. I glanced back and saw the men gaining on me, their faces determined and menacing. Panic surged through me. I couldn't outrun them for long. Then a thought hit me. The grove of trees nearby was dense and dark. I could lose them in there. I veered off the path and dashed into the trees, the branches scratching at my face and arms. The darkness closed in around me, and I slowed down, trying to move quietly. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure they could hear it. My relief was short-lived. I stumbled out of the trees and found myself near the secluded pond, a place almost no one visited at night. The water was still and dark, and the area was silent except for the distant rustling of leaves. I heard the men close behind, their voices low and threatening. They split up to search for me, and I saw their flashlights flickering through the trees. My heart sank. I was cornered with nowhere to go. Then I spotted a small rowboat tied to a dock at the edge of the pond. With no other options, I silently slipped into the water, shivering as the cold enveloped me. I hid under the dock, praying the darkness and stillness would hide me. The men's flashlights swept over the water and the dock. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my ears. One of them noticed the ripples in the water and headed toward the dock. I watched in terror as he approached, his flashlight beam getting closer and closer. Just as he reached the edge of the dock, I saw a broken oar lying within reach. I grabbed it, my hands shaking, and with all my strength I struck his legs. He let out a yell and tumbled into the water with a splash. The second man rushed to help him, giving me a precious moment to scramble out from under the dock. I ran as fast as I could, not daring to look back. My mind was blank with fear, and all I knew was that I had to get away. I stumbled through the trees, my breath coming in ragged gasps, until I finally saw the lights of the park exit. I sprinted toward them, my legs feeling like they could give out at any moment. I burst out of the park and onto the street, waving frantically as a police patrol car drove by. The men, realizing they had lost their prey, disappeared into the shadows of the park. I collapsed in relief as the officers rushed to my aid, the terror of the night still gripping me. The officers helped me to my feet and led me to their car. I could barely speak, my body trembling from the fear and exhaustion. They assured me I was safe now, but the terror of what had just happened still gripped me. Reflecting on the experience later, I learned that the park had been a hunting ground for these predators. They had been targeting lone individuals for weeks. My detailed description helped the authorities capture the men. Knowing they were caught brought some relief, but the ordeal left me deeply shaken. I never walk alone at night anymore. I always choose well-lit, crowded roads. The memory of that night stays with me, a chilling reminder of the dangers lurking in seemingly safe places. Every time I think back to that night, I feel a chill come over me. I am more cautious now, always aware of my surroundings. That night changed me forever, teaching me a hard lesson about safety and trust. I was back in my hometown for a break, feeling a bit homesick and nostalgic. One evening, I decided to visit the sports field where I used to practice soccer all the time. I remembered the countless hours I spent there, running drills and playing games. It was the off-season now, so I knew the field would be empty. The air was cool and the sky was a deep shade of twilight as I walked onto the field. I could see my breath in the air. Everything looked so familiar. The tall goalposts, the bleachers where my friends and I used to hang out, and the old scoreboard that never seemed to work quite right. As I walked across the field, memories started flooding back. I remembered the thrill of scoring goals, the sound of cheering, and the feeling of being part of a team. It made me happy but also a little sad, knowing those days were behind me. I took a deep breath and smiled. Glad to be back, even if just for a little while. The field was quiet, with only the rustling of leaves and the gentle breeze. It felt peaceful, yet there was something about the silence that made me a bit uneasy. But I shrugged it off, thinking it was just my imagination. As I continued to wander around the field, lost in my memories, I suddenly heard a faint sound of footsteps behind me. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, or maybe a stray animal. I shook my head, trying to focus on the good memories, but the sound continued. It was steady and deliberate, like someone was following me. I looked around, my heart starting to race. Near the bleachers, I spotted a figure moving in the shadows. My heart skipped a beat, and a chill ran down my spine. The field lights flickered on, casting long, eerie shadows. That's when I saw him, a man with a weathered face and wild eyes. It was the groundskeeper, a man known around town for being a bit unhinged. The groundskeeper walked towards me, his gait uneven, his eyes locked on mine. There was something about his stare that made me feel incredibly uneasy. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and rough. "Leave. Now." I nodded quickly, apologizing as I backed away. I turned and walked towards the exit, my heart beating fast. But when I reached the gate, I found it padlocked. I started to panic as I realized I was trapped inside the field. I turned back and saw the groundskeeper standing still, watching me with a strange smile. My mind raced. Why was the gate locked? What was this man's intention? Then, as he got closer, I saw it. He was holding a rusted shovel, and his grin sent shivers down my spine. "I enjoy playing games with anyone who trespasses during the off-season," he said, his voice dripping with menace. I tried to reason with him, my voice shaking. "Look, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I'll leave now." But he swung the shovel at me, barely missing my head. That was all I needed. I sprinted away, trying to think through the fear and stress of a way out of this nightmare. I headed towards the locker rooms, thinking I might find something to defend myself with. The sound of his footsteps followed me, slow and methodical. I reached the locker rooms and barricaded the door with a bench. I searched through the lockers frantically but found nothing useful. The door rattled and I knew the groundskeeper was close. In desperation, I found a small window. I managed to squeeze through it, dropping onto the grass outside. My hands were scratched and bleeding, but I couldn't stop now. I ran towards the equipment shed, but suddenly I stumbled and fell. I realized too late that the groundskeeper had set traps, hidden holes and tripwires. I scrambled to my feet, feeling a sharp pain in my ankle. Limping, I reached the shed and locked myself inside. Through the cracks in the wooden walls, I saw the groundskeeper approaching, dragging something heavy behind him. I looked around and found an old baseball bat. I gripped it tightly, my only defense. The groundskeeper started banging on the shed door, taunting me. He sang mockingly, come out wherever you are." The door wouldn't hold for long. I looked around desperately and saw a small dusty window at the back of the shed. I broke it with the bat and climbed out, cutting my hands on the glass. As I ran towards the bleachers, I heard the groundskeeper's laughter behind me. It echoed in the night, chilling me to the bone. I climbed up the bleachers, hoping to use the high ground to my advantage. The groundskeeper followed, his eyes wild with excitement. A tense standoff ensued. I swung the bat, knocking the shovel out of the old man's hands. We struggled, and with a burst of adrenaline, I managed to push the groundskeeper off the bleachers. He hit the ground hard, knocking himself out. Breathing heavily, I looked down at the unconscious groundskeeper. I was shaking and my body was exhausted, but I had survived. The danger wasn't over, but at least for now, I was safe. I sprinted towards the park's main exit. I could hear the groundskeeper groaning behind me, but I didn't dare look back. My only thought was to get out of there and find help. My legs felt like they could give out at any moment, but I pushed myself to keep running. As I neared the exit, I spotted a car parked just a few meters away. It was a couple making out. I waved frantically, hoping they would see me. They both jumped from fright when I banged on the front of the car as I reached them. I was so relieved when the guy grabbed a gun and climbed out of the car, ordering me to put my hands behind my back and face the car. He was a security guard. The groundskeeper, realizing he was no longer alone, turned in his tracks and disappeared into the dark. I collapsed into myself beside the car and lifted my hands in the air as I exclaimed that he was trying to kill me. The guard's demeanor changed as he asked me a number of questions until he was convinced I was a victim and not an attacher. The danger was finally over. I had escaped the groundskeeper's twisted game, and now I was safe. Reflecting on the experience later, I learned that the groundskeeper had been terrorizing people who wandered onto the field during the off-season. My detailed account offered to the authorities after my experience helped the police capture him. Knowing he couldn't hurt anyone else brought some comfort, but the ordeal left me deeply shaken. I never visit the sports field alone again. I always choose well-lit, public places where there are other people around. The memory of that night stays with me, a chilling reminder of the dangers that can lurk in familiar places. Every time I think back to that night, I find myself having to focus on my breathing. The fear I felt was real, and it taught me to always be cautious and aware of my surroundings. That night changed me, making me more careful and appreciative of my safety. I had just finished my long night shift at the downtown office. It was late, and I was really tired and eager to get home. I rushed to the subway station, but I just missed my regular train. Now it was past midnight, and the underground station was almost empty. The air was cool and slightly damp, and there was a faint smell of metal and concrete. The station was dimly lit, with flickering lights creating eerie shadows on the walls. Occasionally, I saw a homeless person huddling in a corner, trying to stay warm. I took a seat on a worn-out bench waiting for the next train. I glanced around, feeling a bit uneasy. The silence was unsettling, broken only by the distant sound of a dripping pipe and the occasional rumble of a train passing on another track. I checked the schedule and saw that the next train wouldn't arrive for another 20 minutes. I sighed and looked around again. The station felt strange at this hour, so empty and quiet. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I tried to tell myself I was just tired and that everything was fine. But deep down, I knew I needed to stay alert until my train arrived. As I sat there, waiting for my train, I noticed a man in a station uniform walking towards me. Something about him seemed off. His uniform was slightly dirty and didn't fit him well. His eyes were cold and unsettling, sending a chill down my spine. He walked up to me and offered help, asking if I needed assistance or information about the trains. "No, thank you," I replied, trying to sound polite but feeling uncomfortable. The man didn't leave. Instead, he stayed nearby, watching me with an intense stare. I could feel his eyes on me, and it made my skin crawl. I tried to brush off the interaction, telling myself I was just tired and overreacting. But the unease wouldn't go away. As the minutes passed, I got up and moved to another bench, hoping he would leave me alone. But he followed me, keeping his distance but never taking his eyes off me. His presence became increasingly aggressive and menacing. I checked the schedule again, hoping the train would arrive soon. Every second felt like an eternity. The station seemed to grow darker, and the flickering lights cast eerie shadows around us. The man's gaze never wavered, making me feel really creeped out. I moved again, this time walking towards the end of the platform, hoping to shake him off. But he matched my pace, his footsteps echoing in the empty station. I glanced back and saw him still following me, his cold eyes fixed on me. My anxiety grew and I started to feel trapped. The once familiar station now felt like a dangerous place, and I realized I needed to find a way to stay safe until my train arrived. I could no longer dismiss the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The man was getting closer, and I knew I had to stay alert and be ready for anything. I realized the man was not going to leave me alone. I turned to face him, my voice shaking as I demanded, "Who are you really? Why are you following me?" The man's demeanor changed instantly. The fake friendliness vanished, replaced by open hostility. His eyes narrowed and he lunged at me. I barely dodged his attack, my heart pounding in my chest. I ran down the platform, the station feeling like a maze with dark corners and dead ends. The shadows seemed to close in around me as I searched desperately for a way out or a place to hide. I spotted a maintenance door slightly ajar and slipped inside, hoping to find safety. Instead, I found myself in the dark, narrow tunnels of the subway system. The air was damp and musty, and my footsteps echoed off the walls. Behind me, I could hear the man's footsteps getting closer and closer. His presence was like a dark cloud, filling me with dread. Navigating the maze of tunnels, my breath came in short gasps. I stumbled over debris, feeling the sharp pain of cuts and bruises. Rats scurried past me, adding to the sense of horror. The man's taunts echoed through the tunnels, his voice full of malice. "You can't hide forever," he called out, his words sending chills down my spine. Exhausted and desperate, I spotted an emergency phone mounted on the tunnel wall. I picked it up, my hands trembling, but the line was dead. Just then I saw the beam of a flashlight bouncing off the walls. The man was getting closer, his steps slow and deliberate. I grabbed a loose pipe from the ground, my only hope of defending myself. My heart raced as the man appeared, his face twisted in a cruel smile. He lunged at me, and I swung the pipe with all my strength. A struggle ensued, the sound of metal clashing with bone echoing through the tunnels. Somehow I managed to strike him hard enough to make him stagger back. He fell to the ground, temporarily incapacitated. Gasping for breath, I saw my chance to escape. I turned and ran, not daring to look back, knowing I had only a small window of time to get away. My heart pounded in my ears as I sprinted through the tunnels, praying I would find a way out before he recovered. Adrenaline fueled my escape as I sprinted back towards the main platform. I could hear the man groaning behind me, but I didn't dare slow down. My only thought was to get to safety. My legs felt like they could give out at any moment, but I kept pushing myself forward. As I neared the exit, I saw a police patrol walking through the station with a couple of sniffer dogs. Relief washed over me, and I waved frantically, shouting for help. The officers noticed me and hurried over. I glanced back and saw the back of the man as he ran the other way. My body shook with exhaustion and fear. I realized I was preparing for the worst and was stiff with fear. I tried to explain what had happened, my voice trembling. The officers listened carefully, their faces serious as they took in my frantic explanation. They assured me that I was safe now and that they would search the tunnels for the man. Knowing that help had arrived brought some comfort, but I was still shaken by the night's events. The danger was finally over, but the memory of what had happened would stay with me for a long time. Reflecting on the experience later, I learned that there had been a couple of reports of missing people last seen entering the subway around this area late at night. I consider myself very lucky to have escaped my late-night traveling horror. The police never did find the man, and I have no idea where he came from or where he went. All I know is I never take the subway alone at night anymore. I realized I had left my lucky bracelet in my gym locker after the last day of school before summer vacation. The bracelet was a gift from my late grandmother, and it held great sentimental value. I felt uneasy without it. One warm summer evening, while my parents were out, I decided to sneak into the school to get it back. I knew the janitor kept a spare key hidden near the back door, a trick I learned from my friends. As I walked through the empty schoolyard, the setting sun cast long shadows, making the familiar school building look strange and eerie. My heart pounded as I approached the back door. I found the key hidden in its usual spot and let myself in. The cool air of the deserted school sent a chill down my spine. The hallways, usually bustling with students, were silent and dark. Only the faint hum of the air conditioning broke the silence. My footsteps echoed as I made my way to the gym. The quiet was unsettling, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tried to push the fear aside, focusing on getting my bracelet and leaving as quickly as possible. I made my way to the gym, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. The sound seemed to bounce off the walls, making the school feel even more deserted. I pushed open the heavy gym doors and stepped inside. The gym, usually filled with the sounds of bouncing balls and chattering students, was now oppressively quiet. The dim lighting created eerie shadows on the walls, making everything look different and spooky. As I approached my locker, I heard faint echoes and the sound of something being dragged across the floor. I tried to tell myself it was just the old building settling, but my heart began to race. I opened my locker and quickly retrieved the bracelet, feeling a little better now that I had it. But the unsettling noises continued, growing louder and more persistent. I looked around nervously, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow. That's when I caught a glimpse of a shadow moving on the far wall. Panic set in as I realized I wasn't alone. The gym suddenly felt much darker and more sinister. I heard faint, heavy breathing and the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. My mind raced as I tried to figure out what to do. The fear that had been gnawing at me now gripped me fully. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and my hands started to tremble. The gym, which had once been a place of fun and activity, now felt like a trap. I had to get out of there, but I didn't know where to go. The footsteps were getting closer, and I knew I had to act fast. I moved quietly towards the exit, trying to keep my breathing steady. Just as I reached the door, it slammed shut with a loud bang. I jumped and turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows. It was Mr. Grady, the former janitor who had been recently fired for inappropriate behavior. He looked disheveled and unhinged, his eyes wild and unfocused. He started talking to himself, muttering about how the school still belonged to him. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Now you're part of my game." I tried to reason with him, my voice trembling. "Mr. Grady, I just came to get my bracelet. I'm leaving now." But my words only seemed to agitate him more. He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "You're not leaving," he said, his voice rising. "No one leaves my game." Panic surged through me, and I made a dash for the main entrance. But Mr. Grady was faster than I expected. He anticipated my move and locked the doors before I could reach them. Desperation set in as I ran to the emergency exit, but it was also locked. I could hear Mr. Grady laughing, the sound echoing through the empty gym. "You can't escape," he taunted. "You're trapped." I bolted towards the locker rooms, hoping to find a place to hide. I slipped inside and locked the door behind me, my breath coming in short gasps. I could hear Mr. Grady's footsteps getting closer, and I scrambled to find something to defend myself with. I grabbed a heavy metal bar from one of the lockers and held it tightly. The door rattled as Mr. Grady tried to force it open. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked around for another way out. I spotted a small window high up on the wall. With no other choice, I climbed up and squeezed through, cutting my hands on the glass. I dropped to the ground outside and ran down the hallway, leaving a trail of blood behind me. I reached the cafeteria and hid behind the kitchen counter, trying to steady my breathing. I could hear Mr. Grady enter, his muttering louder now. He started searching for me, knocking over tables and chairs in his frustration. I spotted a phone on the wall and quietly made my way towards it, praying it still worked. I picked up the receiver and dialed 911, my hands shaking. Just as the call connected, Mr. Grady saw me and charged. In a desperate move, I grabbed a pot of hot coffee from the counter and threw it in his face. He screamed in pain, temporarily blinded. I pushed past him and ran towards the principal's office, my heart racing. I locked the door behind me and waited for help, my hands still shaking from the adrenaline. I crouched in the principal's office, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. I could still hear Mr. Grady's enraged shouts as he tried to break into the office. The door rattled violently, and I feared it wouldn't hold for much longer, but then I heard the faint sound of sirens approaching. A wave of relief washed over me, knowing help was on the way. The sirens grew louder, and soon I saw the flashing lights of police cars outside the window. The door continued to shake under Mr. Grady's assault, but I knew it wouldn't be much longer. The police arrived just in time. They burst into the school and subdued Mr. Grady, freeing me from my terrifying ordeal. I was shaken but unharmed, grateful that my quick thinking had saved my life. Reflecting on the experience later, I learned that Mr. Grady had been living in the school's basement since his dismissal. Believing it was still his domain, the authorities managed to get him the help he needed, but the incident left me deeply shaken. I never go anywhere alone at night again, and always make sure someone knows where I am. The memory of that night stays with me, a chilling reminder of how quickly a familiar place can turn dangerous.